Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this hearing for the Budget and Finance Committee for Monday, April 13th, 2015. I'm Paul Krikorian, Chair of the committee. I'm joined by my colleagues, Council Members Koretz, Englander, and Blumenfield, and we're ready to begin today's meeting. If anybody would like to offer public comment on any of the matters on today's agenda or within the jurisdiction of this committee, please fill out one of these cards and bring it forward. Right now, I only have one card for general public comment, so I'm going to ask Dr. Weissman to come up and offer his general public comment. And in the meantime, are there any public commenters on items 3, 10, 11, 15, 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, or 7? Okay. So seeing none, public comment on those matters is closed. And Dr. Weissman, one moment, please. Members, items 3, 10, 11, and 15 appeared to me to be appropriate for resolution as consent matters. Unless there are any questions or concerns about those matters. Mr. Englander, are you good? 3, 10, 11, 15. Okay. Okay, we'll hold item. Okay. Yeah? Okay. Okay, so items 3, 10, 11, and 15, members, without objection, the recommendations will be approved on consent. And that then brings us to Dr. Weissman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, all present. As all of you know, public comment is not the place to try to describe anything in detail, but we have about a month and a half of activity coming before you and the rest of us, in which our budget will be dissected. I can use that word.
You can use it.
I simply wanted to bring several of the high questions that I hope will be considered and answered, or at least made part of the determinations that are before you for the next few weeks. Number one, I would like to see more specifics in what to do about the fact that this city goes into debt starting on July 1st and does not have the capacity to pay its bills month by month by month until December 1st. That's something that a farmer does when it plants a crop, but a city shouldn't do that. And there are a number of ways in which that can be solved. And by solving it, there are a number of problems that become both no more problem and are resolved. The second area that I hope to see a good deal of discussion about and a good deal of progress made over the next few weeks would be consideration of whether or not the city can consider to change its policy so that it applies similar penalties and interest rates for late payment of debt to the discounts it requires when it pays its debts early. It seems inconsistent that you should ask your debtor, when you create a debt, to pay you when you do not ask the debtor who does not pay its debts on time to pay its debts. And I'll just say the last sentence quickly, if you will give me the permission to do so.
Sure.
And that is, how can the city define, describe, and definitively pursue a plan to repair, restore, and improve the maintenance, and essentially to modernize what has been a very long neglected infrastructure. And infrastructure is now getting to be a list that is this long. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Weissman. I have no other general public comment cards, so general public comment is closed. And we'll now be proceeding to our closed session items. We have 7 items, so I'd just like the city attorney's office to kind of block those so that we can get people out as quickly as we can. It doesn't matter to me what order we take them in, as long as, maybe we can finish up one subject matter area and then move them out. So But we'll go now to closed session, so if anybody is here on items other than our closed session items, I'd like to ask you to step out, please. And let's make sure that the other room, is the other room open?
Yes.
Okay, so there's places to sit in the other room behind us if you'd like. So, what matter shall we hear first? Okay, we're back now in open session, and for the record, Mr. Bonin joined us during closed session as well, following consideration of items 1 and 2. So, members, I'd like to propose that we now move out of order to item number 9, which would typically be proposed as a consent item, but Mr. Blumenfield needs to recuse himself.
Oh, you want me to formally make that?
Yeah.
So, third construction project report contains an instruction to accept reimbursement from the Discovery Science Center. My spouse is employed by the Discovery Science Center, therefore I want to recuse myself from this vote.
All right. So,
No.
all right. So, we're on item 9. So,
Put that in the record.
members, Mr. Blumenfield has recused from this matter. Are there any questions or comments? Otherwise, seeing none? Okay, then thank you for your patience. Without objection, with Mr. Blumenfield recusing from the vote, the recommendation to...
Wait, no, hold on.
Yes.
That does matter.
Do I will. I have to.
When you recuse, we do recuse. You recuse, we leave, we vote, come back.
Okay. I think
That's what we do.
discretion would be the better part of valor. So.
Ready?
Okay, very good.
We need a motion to reconsider?
No, I don't think
We haven't
took an
voted yet.
So is there any objection to approving the CAO's recommendations on item number 9?
None thus far.
Seeing none, then by 4-0 vote, and for the record, Mr. Blumenfield is out of the room, that matter will be approved. All right. That brings us then to item number 8.
Item number 8 is a motion concurring Weston relative to instructing the CAO and the CLA to report with an overview of the annual budget hearing process.
So members, we're about to embark on another journey through the budget, and so this is just to give us kind of an overview of what the procedure will be between now and final approval. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. So Ben Sahel with the CAO. As you all know, the mayor's proposed budget will be coming out on April 20th. Soon thereafter, all of your offices and the CLA will begin reviewing the budget and and be briefed as well by our office to ensure that we have a knowledgeable council committee ready to make questions, to ask questions, and review everything that's in the budget. As you know, the hearings start on April 27th, if I'm not mistaken, the 28th. The CAO will begin the hearings by presenting his overview of the budget. I think the mayor's offices will also be presenting their overview of the budget, some opening statements, and soon thereafter, according to the schedule that's been already being drafted by the council, the chair's office, there'll be set times for when departments' budgets, specific budgets will be heard. During that time, a number of questions are asked. A lot of those questions, it's within the duties of the CAO or the department or the mayor's office to answer those questions. For those questions that can't be answered or for specific requests for report backs, our office is in charge of coordinating those report backs to the committee. That's a very arduous process in that every day after the hearings, our office meets with the CLA and with the chair's office to basically go over the prior meeting notes and make sure that we caught every single request for a report back. We enter those requests, and we have a team of staff, by the way, that sits on the side transcribing all those report back requests, making sure that we got the proper question taken down, the committee person that asked for that report back, and then based on those notes, as I mentioned, we sit down with the CLA and the chair's office to make sure we got down all the lists of questions for that day, so that we ensure that we didn't miss anyone. We enter those questions into a database. The database is sorted according to the chair's request. They could be sorted by departments. It could be sorted by the person that asks for that question. But it is, again, somewhat of a arduous process to make sure that we get every question and the list is put forth in the proper way that the chair would like to see. The following day, the chair will go through the list of those report backs, those questions, to make sure that proper determination is made as to whether or not those are budget impact questions, meaning that a report back will be required before the budget session ends on the mayor's proposed budget, or if they're what we refer to as special studies, which will be report backs that can take place anytime thereafter. What we want to make sure, though, is that in many cases, the CAO is not the actual department that's writing the report back. We coordinate those responses, but in many cases, it's the departments themselves that will have to, respond to those questions, and that's something that it's necessarily out of our control. We do every effort to make sure that the departments have that urgency and come up with the responses in time for the following hearing date. But it's something that we don't necessarily control. On top of the actual report writing, there's a lot of logistics that take place with the memos, including uploading them to the budget site, the copies for members, their staff, and the public. And we do everything we can on our side to make sure that the responses are there, that our responses are there, and just one of the notes I wanted to make sure is that last year our budget impact memos assigned and submitted were 152 total.
152 budget impact memos.
Yes.
Okay.
And of course, the timeline for that is either a 24-hour turnaround for our staff to get those budget memos ready for review, and you know, a maximum maybe of 48 hours.
So members, I think this committee, as currently composed, has done an amazing job of making this an efficient process. We've, you know, tried to conclude our meetings at a reasonable hour of the night, which has been a blessing. I think that the report process has become much more efficient than it was. But this issue, as you'll recall from last year and the year before, that last day of getting reports back is the one point of great chaos in this process still. And I have felt like we're probably not getting maximum benefit out of asking the departments for the information we need. So a couple of suggestions I would like to offer is, number one, and this is for all the departments to hear, there's no need to wait. At the conclusion of the hearing of that department's budget, when we have submitted questions and asked for report back, the time to start working on those reports is the minute that the general manager leaves the door of the committee, not when we conclude our committee hearings. It should start right away, because there are significant times, or there's a number of times where we're sitting around and waiting for department reports to come back, and we have no more work to do until we get those reports back. And it creates a tremendous backlog for the CAO and for the CLA. So I would like to encourage all departments to expedite that reporting process. On our end, one way that we can help them to do that is, from now, I think all of us know a number of areas that we're going to want to ask questions about. If you can, to the greatest degree that you can submit those in advance, in writing, we'll be able to compile those already and get the general manager to give us an answer right during the hearing. If we can do that, we will relieve a great deal of the workload on their shoulders. So it won't be possible to do that. I get it. It won't be possible to get all of that done, because things will come up as we're discussing, and that's part of the hearing process. But to the greatest degree that we can think of it in advance and get them down in writing, let's get them started on their reports right now. And if, you know, maybe we'll get a report back during the hearing, but at least they can get a head start on preparing the written reports back. And then the other thing I would suggest is, and I think all of us have been guilty of this at one time or another, but there's sometimes broad areas of interest in a particular department that we'll want to report back on. The broader our areas of inquiry, the less specific will be the reports back, and the less useful will be the reports back. And I think you'll recall that we got a lot of those reports back that were so generic, they, you know, no fault of the department, it was just that was sort of the nature of the request. They weren't especially useful in honing us in on what we needed. So if we can keep the requests for reports as specific as possible and get them in as early as possible, make them as clear as possible and germane to the budget, I think we're going to, I don't know that we can bring the number down. I hope we can bring it down from 156, but even if we can't, I think we'll at least have a lot of lead time to get that work done, and we'll get better reports back as a result. So, Mr. Kretz, you had a question?
Well, I'm kind of horrified to hear that it was 156
It's
report
amazing,
requests.
isn't it? You don't realize it until you take
120
look back.
Yeah, it's very possible.
And those were budget related. That's in addition to all the special study ones.
I think it's a good idea if we can come up with them in advance, although my recollection is a lot of them come in the context of the discussion. So I wouldn't overestimate how much we'll be able to do that, but I'm sure we all have some ideas that we know we need to ask in advance, so that could be helpful.
Yeah, particularly on the big issues that are bugging us, and have bugged us for so long, the striping issues, for example. I mean, we've talked about that for years, so we all know that we're going to ask for reports back on that. Let's ask it now. You know, those sorts of things that we know are going to be part of our budget requests. Mr. Englander.
Just, I'd like to add a couple things. First and foremost, thanks for putting this on the agenda before we get into the process. And hopefully there's an opportunity to make some additional suggestions as well outside of the reports, because I've got a couple of ideas as well. As they pertain to the reports, and I think you hit it the nail on the head, boy, I think we're all guilty of having that opportunity to ask for more, particularly on special studies, things that are programmatic or policy related. Because it's also the opportunity to have each and every department in front of us where we normally don't sit on all of those particular policy committees. So we have that opportunity to say, oh yeah, what about this idea? Maybe there's a synergy or a reason, or maybe we can increase or better the service delivery to our constituents if we do it some different way. No budgetary impact. I'd like to take it a step further if possible. Every one of those special studies, anything that's not and I'd like the discussion on this now, because I could be open to either way on this. But perhaps the idea of saying if it's a special study, if it doesn't have a direct budgetary impact for this particular process, then feel free to submit a motion at another time outside of the budgetary process. We can ask on that motion that it come back to the Budget and Finance Committee or a policy committee you may or may not sit on. In fact, we're open to do that on any motion. And quite frankly, it's incredibly rare that the council president doesn't allow it if there's an interest by any of the members to say, I want that in my policy committee. I've had virtually every request. If I thought there was something public safety in nature, come to public safety committee if there was any issue at all. And I think we're all granted that. So I would ask for that discussion, and perhaps then looking at the budgetary, well, first of all, that cuts a lot of that commotion out and trying to figure out, is it budgetary or is it not? Is it policy? Is it something else? And that should be done, and that really should be done by motion. Because the other thing is, we're throwing those out there, and there could be another 100 of those. I don't know what the number was.
There were probably over 200 of those.
So the issue with that, with over 200 of those, we're like, okay, great, we won't deal with that now. But then we walk out of that, and then all the policy committees, those get stacked up. Quite frankly, I don't know how many of those were even heard throughout the year in policy committees, or resolved, or are still pending, or made it to council. And then the hundreds of reports back from staff based on those hundreds of, special studies, which they may very well be incredibly important, but then they should be generated by a council motion, because all we're doing simply is bogging down staff. And where many of those could be a meeting within our office. We have an interest in a particular program or a policy or a process, and maybe we want to look for some innovations, some collaboration between different departments. Oftentimes, those are things can be taken care of offline. And if they can't be, there's a good opportunity to submit a motion. So I've always been wanting to have that conversation, so I really appreciate that you brought this up. And if we could talk about that. The second thing is a request on all the specific budget memos. If we can put the council district number and or number specifically on who's requesting them on every single document, including the ones that come back for tracking purposes. So when we're going through them at a moment's notice, we know who requested it, we know who asked for it. When the memo comes back from the department, it can say per CD12, per CD12 and CD2, whoever requested them. So we can tie that back to the person who asked for it. Otherwise, we're trying to go through what hopefully won't be 150, it may be only half of that. But it helps our staff a lot because it's all hands on deck, and there's different staff members on every staff that are assigned to different departments. They're not even sure what you asked for. So I think for tracking purposes, and then also when we're going through the answers, we can say, okay, here's who asked the question. If there's a way to capture that as we go, that would be helpful.
Yeah, I'm sure there is, as we kind of keep track of things during the course of the hearings, and that can be one of the bits of information that's included, and then maybe the CAO can work into their memo process something that identifies that.
For both the listed memos and then the responses, to just put the council district number and/or numbers who've requested it. And before we go on to another item, say, well, hold on, who's requesting that? Because we all might be weighing in.
It's
We
easier
have it down.
to identify who's requested it. Sometimes which district it impacts, a lot of times that's citywide, so.
Sometimes.
Right.
But I'm not saying the district it impacts. I'm saying whoever, of only the committee, whoever asked for it.
And we tried to do that sort of on the fly last year with mixed results.
Yes.
And part of the reason for the mixed results was because CLA and CAO tried their best to consolidate comparable requests. But my request might be slightly different than Mr. Bonin's request, for example, but they're both on the same topic, so they
Right.
would try and consolidate.
And even if we do that, that's why I say council district numbers,
them both.
or list them both.
Yeah.
Exactly. Have enough room to list. You can even say a category that says all. We all requested that. But I think that would be very helpful for all of us.
I think that's something that can be worked out.
Particularly for the departments also, because departments might say, what are they asking for, and who do I go back and check with?
That's true.
And so we've had that happen as well, and so I think it'll be helpful. So if that is asked and answered, I'd like to go back to the original thought.
To that point, though,
As well, yeah.
I think there's a utility to that, but I don't want to get too caught up in it, because a lot of times someone asks something, and I might be thinking the same thing. I'm not going to say, oh, I want to put my name on that too, but I don't want that ownership of whoever has asked that question to then, maybe you resolve it with the CLA, but there may be two other members who were interested in that who just didn't ask it, or but really want to hear that answer to it. So it is a useful tracking mechanism, but it shouldn't become the sort of the property of the person who asked the question, because we're all interested in this.
And that's not the
thing.
intent.
And I know it's not, but that's my concern, is that once you start saying, well, that's Bob's question, then we talk about it, and you say, well, is your question answered? I said, yeah, it is. Then you don't need to do anything more. Well, Mike might have had that same question. He just heard me ask it first, and he still wants to hear, or he may not be satisfied with the answer that we've worked out offline.
Yeah.
So that's my concern about making it too proprietary, although I understand the tracking piece has a utility, but in terms of the big public world of saying this is Bob's question or Mike's question, I think we lose something there.
Well, just so that we're focusing on what our intent here is, because the value that I see in this, that I enjoyed last year, was being able to tell Matt, did this list of reports encompass everything I asked about? Mm-hmm. And he'll go and he'll look at it and he'll say, yeah, it did. But we can only do that if we have a way to compare. So if that's the objective, to have that kind of tracking for it, then to your point, Mr. Bloomfield, maybe what we can do is, if Mr. Kretz makes a request for a report, it's a CD5, we're going to indicate CD5 on there, and then the rest of us can say, I'm interested in that too.
Yeah.
And then, just add me to that list, so that we, we'll have on there, all members, or 11, 5, and 3, or whatever.
The other opportunity, don't forget we have, is the next day we go over all the list of requested items and saying, do we still want those report backs? Were anything satisfied? Are there any amendment or changes before we move on? And we approve the list of questions that were asked the previous day. You can always add our names or council district numbers respectively to those questions that were asked as well.
And to that point, that next day review that we all do, first of all, they have worked, through the night,
all night,
to come up with this list and to produce a thing as best they can, from hearing 5 people talking, over each other sometimes, and in the midst of the hearing. They've done the best they can do to do that. We can clarify that the next day, and I think it's important that we do, for the departments and for the CAO and CLA staff. But in order for us to have the time to do that, we have to kind of reduce the number of asks in the first place. And I think, especially your point about the special study stuff by motion, if we can move as many of those off the table as we can, then it's that much fewer notes that they're trying to take in the hubbub of the hearing. They're trying to get it all down, and they're not drawing that distinction of special study or budget related at the time. They're just trying to take it all down.
And that's, if we eliminate those, look, all of our staff are in the room. Our council staff as well. If there's an idea for a motion and you want to really drill down on something, it's easy enough to say, hold on, time out. I want to tell my staff and ask my staff to make a note I want to do a motion on that later. We could always do that.
Really welcome that.
And just there were 224 requests for special studies last year, and that was a consolidated list.
Do we budget the special studies? It needs to be a budget item.
I appreciate the recommendations. I think they're all great. I really appreciate, Mr. Chair, the way you ran the hearings last year, getting us out at a reasonable hour, and they were still substantive discussions during the day. They never felt rushed. So I appreciate that. I love the idea of asking for some stuff in advance. There was a sort of a foundational question I asked last year of the planning department. I wanted to know how well their resources matched up geographically with where the planning case demand was. And I never really got an answer on that in a way that helped inform me vote on the planning department budget. So that's a question I'll certainly ask of planning in advance. There's a question I'd like to ask of CLA and CAO in advance that I'd like before the budget is presented, if I could. It's, and I'm going to try to narrow it very small. Last year, during the committee deliberations, the committee made some adjustments to the budget. In the grand scheme of things, they weren't huge or dramatic. Some of us managed to secure additional or different positions for various departments. Bike and ped coordinators, some additional positions in the planning department and stuff like that. I'd like to know if you could give us, prior to this year's budget, a breakdown of the positions that were created as a result of the committee deliberations, which I think won't be a very large number, and when those got filled during the course of the fiscal year, if they got filled. Because one of my frustrations has been, I felt like we got some stuff in the budget, and then it's like March, and it's like the position is still vacant. And rather than ask for a grand comprehensive study of the entire budget, just maybe that narrow window could give me a look into what the process is.
So the positions that were added last year as part of the council's deliberations, and whether they were filled?
If and when they got filled.
I think that's going to be somewhat of a difficult nature because, you could have added a resolution position, for example, of a clerk typist. But when the department fills a clerk typist, I don't know who else but the department will know that it's the position that was added by council, that's that clerk typist, specific clerk typist position that was filled versus any other number of clerk typist position vacancies or positions that they had. That's not something that us at the CAO would have. It's going to be an individual department answer. They may have that information. They may be able to, based on their own, because we don't have a citywide position control, each individual department has their own unique way of keeping control of their positions.
But doesn't everything go through managed hiring?
No. I mean, we provide, we could provide a blanket authority to a department to fill, 100% of all clerk typist positions that they have.
Okay, if you could do the best with what my request is, I mean, some of it obviously you could do based on my request, some you couldn't.
What we could do is we could try to identify the positions, at least the classifications and positions, unique positions that were added during what we would call council changes, and have the departments report back, hopefully, in preparation for the hearings of when they're up, to report back on when those individual positions were filled, if they have that information. But I'm not sure all departments will be able to provide it. It's my hope that they would be.
I don't think there were that many added by this committee. I know there were a couple, 2 or 3 in planning or DOT, but there wasn't a lot. So I don't think it's a big ask.
There were some, and then there were some that were not funded. So, but I think Mr. Sayah is correct, is it might be difficult to put that together and know without, the departments would need to respond to that. That's something that you could ask them during their budget hearing.
And what we would do is we would send out a request for information before the hearing. So we could send out a memo to all departments that received, were added positions during that process and provide a update as to what the status of those positions is, just like what you asked, or when those positions were filled.
That I guess would be helpful. I'll tell you what I'm trying to avoid. I hate wasting my time, and I felt like I spent a lot of time on some stuff in last year's budget, and in some cases I'm not sure that I actually got the payoff on it. And that's what I want to know before I go into this year's budget.
Okay. We'll do our best to get you that information as before the hearings.
Great, thank you.
And if I could just add that any assistance in having some of the questions that the departments can answer right at the budget hearings is very helpful to us, because we're continuing to work during this entire time, and we're trying to keep track of the things that the committee has as priorities. And so if the more information we have during that hearing, the earlier we have it, and we can commence work on that, because we don't wait till the very end. We're working throughout the entire process. So,
excuse me, Mr. Chair. One of the asks that the chair usually does to departments is for them to submit a memo, kind of to provide their take on what the mayor's proposed budget is, and maybe this is one of those items that can be addressed in that memo.
Yeah, and I want to speak to that again for all who are listening, because we've also had mixed results from departments on that. And some departments have been pretty thorough and pretty timely. Others have, sort of disregarded that request altogether. And to the degree that that request is disregarded, it is inevitably going to result in more work for that department, because we're going to ask for more reports back. I can tell them that right now. So the better job they do in preparing their memo in advance, the better and more efficient our hearings are going to be. Mr. England.
I was going to suggest the same. I think it's mandatory that all departments and all department heads are responsible for submitting that to the chair on time. It's a critical part of this process, and I have been there many years where the chair has gotten very frustrated, as we all have, where the memos aren't there. So I would ask that they do submit their memo in as great a detail as possible. Their memo should also not just be about what they didn't get, because oftentimes it's, well, we asked for this, and this is not what we got, and this is what we need. So it should be a little more detailed. The more detailed, the less questions from us. So it should require a lot of thought to go into their memos. The other two things on the memos is I would request that departments don't just simply sit at the table and read their memo. We've gotten them in advance. We've read the memos. Many of the departments come and just simply read their memo. I don't think there's a need for that. And so if we can, and we did cut that out last year, and then we reminded them, but some of them still did that. And then the last thing is, if they have their key staff there, they should be able to answer all the questions. And we should be able to take the time to ask all the specific questions, unless they have to be researched, budget-specific research has to be done for us to make an informed decision. We should be able to, oftentimes we'll ask for a memo back without giving the department the opportunity to see if they can answer it first. So I would like to take a pause first for each question when we submit those requests, and ask the department simply while they're there and they have their key staff, can you in fact answer this now, or do you have to report back? Because oftentimes we can get the question and we've either cut them off or they've already walked away, but they're still in the room. There may be an opportunity to get the answers right there on the spot, rather than simply getting the report back.
That's a good suggestion. We'll endeavor to do that, and I think that'll be made that much easier if as many of the questions as possible can be provided in advance. But you're right. I mean, there's some things that probably they can answer off the top of their head, and maybe it won't be with the same degree of precision as if they went back and researched it, but it might be perfectly satisfactory for us in making a budget decision. So that's a good point. Yeah. Mr. Bloomfield, any further on this? Gentlemen, anything else? All right. Great. I'm glad we were able to have this little chat, and look forward to making this year an even more efficient process. So, thank you all. All right, that brings us then to item number 12.
For clarification, that matter is just held in committee?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, noting and filing it, or well, yeah, we'll just hold it in committee. We'll continue it in committee so we can have further discussion about it if need be.
Good afternoon. Assistant City Attorney Ann Haley. How are you? And as we do quarterly, we have before you our quarterly outside counsel expenditure report. This one actually for the time ending September of 2014. And actually the December report has been filed as well, but that's not on calendar today, so I won't try to sneak that in.
On the adjusting the caps?
No, actually, this is just expenditures. That report also has been filed, but this, of course, is just our expenditures,
But I'm sorry, I misunderstood what you're saying. Were you wanting to discuss both of those at the same time?
Well, not the additional caps, but we have the expenditure report. I think what's on agenda today is for the term ending September. I think as I read that, though the outside council expenditure report for the time ending December 2014 has also already been filed, but not yet agendized. I think they came close together in terms of filing. But I know the rules to know that we can only discuss the September ending report. So that's what we have before you today.
Okay. All right, members, any questions or comments on this report? I'm sorry, maybe I still didn't quite follow on the different report. Did we get a first quarter report?
No, because we filed them in order. So this is a little antiquated at this point, actually. Because this is for September, the expenditures that were from July through September of 2014. So we are somewhat beyond this at this point.
Generally ask a question, which is,
Yeah.
I see the facts of this, but it's hard for me to process what this means. Are any of these outside council expenditures higher or lower than we expected? Is there some, what are we to interpret from these numbers?
Well, and so really the recap page, that's the second page, I think is perhaps most clearly informative, because there is where we break down by department where the expenditures are, and what follows that, the pages that follow actually are the detail of what this recap page shows. So in that first section, you see that the council control departments, those are the general funded numbers you see there in the first column, are outside council expenditures for each of those departments, or for law firms that are assisting us, the city attorney's office, for those various departments. And then, again, if you had a particular interest in any one of those, you could see the actual law firm and the dollar amount expenditure beyond that. And then, of course, we total the expenditures. So in answer to the other part of your question, none of these numbers, they're fairly consistent with what we've been saying. What I do note is that particularly and thankfully in the general funded areas, there's been a slight decrease in expenditures. At this time, there wasn't. That has continued to be the case. You'll see that to be even more so the case in the next report that I've foreshadowed. Proprietary departments are up slightly, particularly at the airport, where there's quite a bit of litigation going on there with the runways and other things. So general funded numbers are stable and down. And as my colleague who in the audience knows, we've had a little uptick in the conflicts area as well, one matter in particular. But other than that, the numbers
to clarify that. Yeah. So comparing these numbers to the last fiscal year as of 9/30/13, how do these numbers compare, year-over-year comparison?
Now that, I thought you might ask that. They are fairly consistent. And I unfortunately don't have the exact numbers from last fiscal year.
I don't think we got that report for that quarter for some reason, or at least that's what my notes say. I don't know.
Oh, really?
I don't remember that far back.
For fiscal 14?
For the first quarter of 13-14. So maybe if you could just check on that so that we can make that year-over-year comparison.
Okay.
And
I can definitely.
The other thing is last year City Attorney's Office had to come for an additional appropriation from the UB for outside counsel expenses. Are we tracking with the budgeted amount for this fiscal year so far?
Yes.
Or do you anticipate having to come back for more?
I hate to even tell you now, but we have fairly significant savings.
All right.
So that's what's coming next, and you'll
Right.
find in the report
Well, I
that you.
need to know.
Yeah. So
That's correct. In the mid-year FSR, we indicated that there were going to be some savings in outside counsel, which we would be applying to the liabilities accounts.
Okay, and hard to predict, I know, but as you budget each of these matters forward, is that going to remain consistent throughout the end of the fiscal year?
Oh, absolutely. So the report that we have already filed asking for additional appropriations that will get us through the end of this fiscal year. That report hopefully will come before you before we get into budgets. That's where we unveiled the savings for this fiscal year. And then we expect those to continue in next fiscal year, barring anything new. I mean, as you know, we've got some settlements, big settlements, that are being handled by outside counsel that we expect to be.
And are the savings coming because we're winning cases quickly, or are they coming because we're now taking on more responsibility in-house?
Both of those, actually. So two of our big pieces of litigation are settling, and so that they're being concluded. And then also, we are bringing more work in-house and sending less out, as it is.
All right, any other questions, members? All right, the recommendation is to note and file. Without objection, that'll be the action of the committee.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that brings us to item number 13.
Item 13 is the City AO report relative to authority for the Office of Finance to execute a contract with Muni Services, LLC, for business tax discovery services.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Jennifer Lopez with the Office of the CAO. With me is Robert Lee from the Office of Finance. Sorry. The item before you is the request from the Office of Finance to execute a contract with Muni Services for the City Tax Discovery Program. This program is to identify or discover businesses that are conducting business in the city that are not registered with the Office of Finance. Muni Services would supplement Finance's efforts to identify, contact, register, and obtain payment from those discovered businesses. Services for the Tax Discovery Program were previously provided by Muni Services, and that expired in November of 2010. A request for proposals was issued in the same year, and a vendor was selected. However, after lengthy negotiations, the selected vendor decided not to continue and proceed with the contract. So Office of Finance re-released another RFP, and upon completion of that process, Muni Service received the highest rating, and they are going to be paid on a contingency fee basis, which means out of the net revenues collected, they get a percent share of that revenue, so there's no additional general fund impact. And given that, we would recommend approval of the contract.
So, since this is on a contingency basis, have you given thought to whether it would be more cost-effective to obtain the necessary databases and to hire the necessary personnel to do this sort of collection effort in-house?
We haven't done, actually the CAO's office hasn't done an evaluation of that. However, it is intermittent in nature, and given the time that it takes to train city staff to do the work, it would take about approximately 3 years according to Finance. Right now, let's say Muni Services does all the research.
Sorry, it would take 3 years to train
Yeah, to
people
fully
do
train a tax compliance officer. That's according to the Office of Finance, but I can let Robert.
Right.
Well, actually, once we bring them in, we slowly, incrementally increase the complexity of what they go after.
Okay.
So our criteria is after the first, second, and third year, we start getting more complex with the discovery information as well as the audit information.
Okay.
In regards to this, we do have existing discovery staff. We have about 21 staff that go after franchise tax board information, other government information as well. But as the CAO states, the purpose of this is to supplement that, since it is on a contingency. Any additional information, any additional databases that they have that we do not have or are not aggressively going after, it allows us additional data and possible discovery.
Yeah, I get that. But for example, if you just look retrospectively to their history of obtaining $40 million in revenues for an $8 million contingency cost, is there any way that we can assess how much of that $40 million is actually found money and how much could have been obtained had we hired 3 people and targeted them or assigned them with that specific responsibility to go and get that at a cost of less than $8 million?
The thing would be the data that they have. Otherwise, it's proprietary data, and we don't have access to what they have. So with us, since we're always trying to discover new databases, if we do not have access to what they have, it almost is our responsibility to see what they have on their plate that would add to ours. Because as you stated, we continuously work on it. We have staff that work on it, and we are aggressively trying to get additional databases. But if they have something we don't have access to, that's a little bit more. And of course, since it's contingency, if they don't find anything, we're not out by anything.
And if I may add to that, they also have exclusive access to IRS tax return information, which we do not have access to as well. And given the...
Sorry, how does a for-profit private company have access to IRS
I think
data
that the level
we
of...
can't get as a government agency?
I think I'm not clear about that, but I know that they have the rights to review tax information because of confidentiality, and they do this with other municipalities. That's what I've read as part of their proposal, but I can...
That's kind of
Otherwise,
very difficult to understand how a for-profit company would have that.
Yeah.
They keep on telling us they have about 28 proprietary databases that they follow through on. Some of it is sort of similar to ours. We know they probably go after the Secretary of State. We know they cannot go after a franchise tax board, so we have that. But some of their databases we know match ours. And what we need to figure out is what other databases that we have not pursued they have access to.
Mm-hmm.
And if it is just that they're farming off of certain databases we have not proceeded after, then we go from that.
Right. Yeah, the issue, though, is now there's a track record. There's $40 million in accounts that they've brought. So you can look at those and say, well, that's stuff we would have gotten anyway, or, wow, that's great, we never would have found that out.
Well, the interesting thing is when we had this original contract between 2005 and 2010, we did not have the new business exemption. We did not have the small business exemption. We did not have a lot of these tax vehicles available. And one of the reasons why we believe that the entity before this did not follow through on it is after looking at some of the data that we provided, they were thinking there wasn't that much there. Because we have been aggressively since even before the program stopped in 2010, we have been aggressively pulling databases that we did not have access to before. Mm-hmm. So we're becoming more competitive, and as long as we keep on going, which is our goal, it's there. But at the same time, we will not look a gift horse in the mouth. If they have something that we don't, then it's worth it.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that the horse really is a gift and not a horse that we should already have in the stable.
And our data matching abilities are getting better and better. We're tracking faster and faster, and we're not giving it that much of a ability to wait on certain things.
Okay. Any other questions on this, members? And what's the term of this contract?
It's 3 years with 2 options.
3 years.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
With an option to extend.
All right. If there's no objection, then be the action of the committee to approve the recommendation. But keep in mind, I am going to want to come back and kind of reassess this. Say, did we get value for the proposition? So, okay. Thank you. And that brings us to item number 14.
Item number 14 is the CA report relative to request for authority to amend 9 legal services contracts under the Attorney Conflicts Panel Program to increase funding for each contract by a cumulative amount of $1,933,500.
Okay. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Dolores Rivera of the CEO's office. The CEO is requesting authority to amend 9 contracts for total funding of $1.93 million. And this would be for funding to cover cases up through October 2015. This would not be all cases, but the most contentious cases. There are also, of the 9 contracts, there are cases that would be for funding to close out the matter. And then there's Vernon Nixon, and that would be for a 2-month transition.
Okay. So that's probably the easiest one.
Yes.
I think I can't really discuss these matters because I would like to discuss these matters. I would have preferred to discuss some of these matters in closed session so I could understand why it is that in some cases we're more than doubling the current contract amount. I mean, that when we have big spikes in what the cap is, I'd really like to have an explanation of why that is.
I can get some generalities.
Either that indicates to me that the litigation has taken a course that wasn't anticipated, or it indicates that the prior budgeting of the cap was obviously too conservative. So in either event, I'd like to be able to explore that, but I don't feel like I can in open session. So
I could speak in generality terms. With this year, the attorney complex panel has been very tight with its funds, so we have been very conservative in funding the cases in general. This list does comprise probably the most active litigation cases, and so with the last funding increase, that was not enough. So I think this does pretty much highlight the most active cases within a mix of some that we're just trying to close out and just finish up.
And I get that. It's good to be conservative in that budgeting so that it requires checking back with the committee. That's a good thing. But on the other hand, we also want to make sure that our cost estimates for litigation are accurate for the duration, as accurate as they can be for the duration of the litigation, so that we can make the assessment of whether it's appropriate to go out and get outside counsel for this matter, or whether we need to resolve this matter. You know, that it just in order to have a eyes wide open about the total cost of the litigation of these matters, I think it's I want to try to be as precise as we can from the outset, and then you know, we can still keep a cap on them as long as we know that our expectation is that it in fact is going to cost significantly more than the cap, but we're going to require them to keep coming back to check in. See what I mean?
Right.
And as I look at this, I just don't know if that's the case or not. I don't know if we've reviewed these things and found that, you know, in the, I'm not going to cite a specific thing, but on the Jones versus Smith matter, that in fact we thought that it was going to be $1 million, but we set a cap of $300,000, and now we're going up the extra $700,000 as we understood we would have to do. I don't get that flavor from this, and I can't really ask those specific questions outside of closed session. Yeah.
On that, because the same questions and concerns you're raising, maybe we could do something where we get a closed session report on any of these that have gone up by 50% or more, something to that effect, and we just agendize that for a future meeting and actually hear. I'm not suggesting we slow down, not prove what's there, but at least get a report on the ones that have gone up significantly. I don't think we care about the $2,000 increases,
right?
The 50% increases,
right? And I think that's fair. I think we can go ahead and approve the recommendations, provided we get that report back, because I don't want to slow up the action of council either. So
a closed session report on.
Yeah.
I mean, how do you want to categorize 50% increase or 20% increase?
Anything where the proposed amendment amount is more than the current contract amount, I think, would be starters.
I mean, you know, the one that's 132 to 136 is $4,000. Does that matter?
Okay,
but yeah, that works.
Okay.
Now, as we're agendizing these for closed session, that doesn't mean I want to fly in every outside counsel from all parts of the state or country to come in and bill us and give us a report. I'd prefer that report come from the CAO, from you.
Okay.
So, and I don't think we're talking about detailed stuff. It's just the generic question of, you know, why is this now $700,000 when the previous cap was $300,000?
I can explain, yes, with the litigation.
And I'm sure you can probably explain that as you sit here, but we just can't do it now because we're in open session. Okay, anything else, members? Okay, without objection, and just for the record, I don't know if we caught that in the last vote, but Mr. Englander is not in the room right now, just for purposes of calculating our vote, but without objection, it'll be the action of the committee to approve yeah, I think we just note and file it? Receive and file it? What's the...
No, it's, we have to, there are recommendations in the report that require approval.
Okay, so to approve the recommendations in the report then. And is there anything further before us? Nope. Okay.
Are you also asking for the report for the future agenda item, or is that separate?
Yeah, we'll just set that on our agenda and make sure we have that back when we can do it, given the tendency of the actual budget coming up. So, all right. There being no other action before the committee, we are adjourned. Thank you all.